Good morning. Thank you for joining us on the Tuesday edition of TVC Breakfast. I am Veronica Dan Ikboy, and I'm not here alone. I have Ibrahim Shita joining me this morning.
It's good to see you again.
Tuesday morning, Ibrahim. Good to see you as well. How are you doing this morning?
I'm so good. Looks like you're having a bit of kata. You're having maybe jet lag. since you arrived back Nigeria. Trust you.
Something like that, but I'll bounce back. Absolutely. But let's look at some of the issues we'll be looking into this morning, talking about the deadlock conversation that the federal government and organized labor had, as well as the President, Tinubu, in the United Nations General Assembly. And then we'll also look at other issues. But first, let's begin with the looming nationwide strike. The meeting between the federal government and the Nigeria Labour Congress to avert the planned strike ended on Monday without a tangible resolution to the union's demands. Federal government has opened talks with the Nigeria Labour Congress with a view to stop the impending nationwide strike. TVC News' Joke Adisa has details.
A nationwide strike is looming, but the Nigerian government says it is determined to avert it. This is the essence of this meeting at the instance of the Minister of Labour and Employment, Simon Lalong. After a two-day warning strike, NLC plans to commence a full-blown indefinite national industrial action later this month due to the inability of the government to meet any of its demands. That 21 working day ultimatum is about to lapse.
We acknowledge the valid grievances that have fueled the recent labor crisis, and we are committed to addressing them in a just and equitable manner. We must also recognize the economic realities that confront us. As we address the concerns of our workforce, we must be mindful of striking a balance that promotes economic growth and secures sustainable progress.
There was no strike before the issue of removal of fuel subsidy and promises. In fact, it was the government that said, ask for palliative, ask for wage, and we have asked for it.
Such demands include an introduction of the compressed natural gas, increase in minimum wage, resolving the ASO and the NURTW crisis, as well as the issue of transfers. The Congress says it is particularly irked by the role of the police in the crisis rocking one of its unions, the NURTW, and says it remains one of the preconditions for averting the impending nationwide strike.
Our meeting was very robust, and we had a very, very fruitful meeting. But at the end of the day, many of those items that we left are still for consideration.
The meeting enters into a technical session thereafter, and journalists are excused. After more than 3 hours, both parties speak on its outcome.
It was not deadlocked because there is discussion, and discussion is a kind of, it has an open, it's an open-ended one that we can meet again this night.
There is no resolution yet on the demands at NLC says it will continue to honor government's invitations aimed at reaching an amicable resolution of all issues in dispute. Joke Adisa, TVC News, Abuja.
All right, it's interesting to see that the government and Labour had an open-ended conversation as against what it's been touted as being deadlocked, and that they could meet at any point to have continued the conversation. And Labour, from its own perspective, is saying we are putting pressure on government because government said we should ask for increase in wages, we should, talk about palliatives. These are the issues we are looking at. The Minister for Labour and Employment, talking about Simon Lalong, also went ahead to say that they had a robust conversation. How robust this conversation was that has ended in an open-ended conversation that has left it open-ended is somehow to me, well, they are still open to dialogue. Perhaps that made it robust. They look at there are still some gray areas that they need to consider. Yeah. But Labour has said that it is the Office of the Presidency that can address some of these issues and that the Ministry of Labour cannot handle some of these decisions that they are asking, some of the demands that they are asking, that it is the office of the presidency that can address that. So maybe moving forward, they might be pushing for having an engagement with the president and the office of the presidency to know how to address some of the issues.
Yeah. I feel that they're actually speaking to the right people, because the right ministry, because that is what the ministry is all about.
Right.
It's just for the ministry to interface between the labor unions, and then also give feedback to the presidency. But all the same, it's just like you said, it's a very good thing that they have an open-ended conversation, open-ended dialogue, where it's more likely that they might also be called upon to come over today again to
within the time frame.
Within the time frame, because the time is really ticking very fast. So what are the things they're asking for? They said that they want the federal government to address the consequences of petrol price hike. We all see what is happening. We all see the fact that the government is trying to cushion the effect on the Nigerian people, giving out palliatives. Also, we saw what that palliative actually led to in Ondo State, where we talked about yesterday, and some other issues that are faced with. Review of the minimum wage. The president was the first person who made this known, but we also have a caveat to it that if the minimum wage is increased, this will
have an inflationary
exactly. So that's the businesses, the companies might actually push that that cost on the consumers, and this might also increase the price of goods and services in the market. So he said one thing that is quite striking. He said workable roadmap to CNG alternative. So he's like, okay, fine. The federal government can, he said they already had an agreement with the past administration that by 2022, the CNG buses, he said more about 1 million of them would have flooded the road. So he doesn't know why the reason why the government has...
Why did they wait up to this point to start asking these questions? This is the same thing I was saying yesterday, following up on some of the demands made, even with state government. Yes, government had agreed at some point, I think that was 2021, to, push in CNG vehicles. We did not see that. What did you do between that time and now? Why are you now putting pressure on the government? Yes, you are supposed to put pressure on government, but you should have followed up with government before now to ensure that something is done. That is my own perspective with regard. We don't just leave things. You had conversation with government, then you leave things and you feel that, okay, I think it was, at this point that you can begin to press your demand.
I think it was born out of the agreement they had with the past administration. So he was like raising concern that why is it that, that the transparency is not there, that if they say they are not able to do it, then it means that something is wrong somewhere.
So where did they leave the conversation off with the past administration?
So he's saying, one thing that I found striking is the fact that he said the federal government can convert all of the vehicles, apart from flooding the roads with CNG powered buses, then they can convert all of the vehicles, in 2 to 3 months. I said, where's the money going to come from? Because currently we know that Nigeria is indebted, and they are servicing their debts with almost more than 90% of the revenue generated. So when we ask for things, it's better we are realistic. It's better we speak to facts, we speak to obtainables, things that are on ground. So rather than just trying to whip up emotions. And it's so sad that the labor unions themselves are not even organized, as we said, as we call them. They're divided, and a divided house, is already defeated. So it's better apart from talking to the federal government, let them come together, via whether it is round table or square table or the kind of shape that we're having here. I think this is a U table. So, whether they should come together and have better conversation, dialogue, and, present a common front, to the federal government. This is what we want, so that you won't be speaking, towards one angle, and another person, another union will be speaking, in another direction. So I feel they need to harmonize what exactly they want the federal government to do in earnest.
Absolutely, and then I would again insist they should follow up with states as well, with those that have made some pledges and began some palliatives, a form of palliatives that have begun. Let's look at how far they have come with those issues, talking about the monies, the buses, the number of days, Let us follow up with them since they have state chapters.